All right, everybody, please welcome Larry.
Well, recipe creation. The main thing I always try to think about with recipe creation, the first thing I'm going to do is, and I know it sounds silly, is I decide what I'm wanting to brew. Um, I pick out certain elements that I want to come to the forefront of whatever I'm trying to make, whether it's something specialty or whether it's a standard style like a bitters, or I think about what elements I want and I pick 1 to 3 and we focus on it. And I do it in several different parts, such as if I'm trying to make, I'll think about the body of the beer I want to make. Whether it's something more hop forward, whether it's going to be a little more malt driven. I'll choose yeast appropriately based on that. One thing that in particular I look at when I'm trying to find, or when I'm trying to build a is I look at bitterness to malt, kind of the malt background. If I'm One of the things I found over the years with maltier beers is if you try to hop them towards the far end of the scale, it's going to be hard to get that mouthfeel. It's going to be hard to get that warm presence that you're wanting with it. I'll think about how drinkable I want the beer to be. Do I want it something that you're going to have a bunch of, drink all day, or whether I want something that you're going to have one of? And after I decide that, then we look into the ABV of the beer. If I'm wanting something that we're going to have more than one of, we're going to go for something that's a little lower ABV than if I wanted something that was, you were going to have one and then go to bed. But all this comes back to deciding what I want to make. If it is something that's going to be something more style oriented, like something that was representative of BJCP or even GABF, I'm going to make malt and hop selections based on that. What things I'm wanting to come to the forefront. I keep saying that, but that's the focus. You need to be very focused on what you want to make, and you need to keep that plan throughout the brewing process. Otherwise, you may start veering off into too many different directions, and you'll wind up with a muddier beer. You can showcase in reality too, maybe 3 elements. Whereas if you try to do everything in a beer, it's not going to do any of them really well. I decide whether I want to, after I've picked, kind of the malt bill based on what I'm trying to do in the hop bill, or the amount of hop or whatever hops I'm wanting to use, we'll go through and I'll pick a yeast, and that's going to be based on what I want to achieve, from how attenuative I want it to be. If I want it to be something dry, I'll pick something that's going to attenuate 75 or higher percentage. But if I'm wanting a lot more mouthfeel, then I'll get something a little lower. I'll pick whether I want the product, whether I want it clean, whether I want there to be any esters, and that'll come back to once again, or more interesting, and we'll come back to yeast selection on that. Whether I want esters like stone fruits or you know, phenols like clove, mouthfeel, like I said, even within the attenuation of the yeast, I'm going, certain yeast strains will accentuate malt more or hop more. Some like Nottingham just chew through everything. It makes a nice beer, but it's not going to leave you much in the way of an interesting malt background. And as far as specialty beers go, I'll figure out, one, whether I'm wanting something that's going to finish a little sweet or something that's going to maybe not. When I want something to come to the forefront of the beer, I tend to try to add it a little closer to the end of the process. I like to add things particularly after fermentation. Like if I want, let's say I want to make a strawberry beer, I would add the fruit at kegging more than I would look to that more than anywhere else in the process, so that you keep those residual sweetness. Fruit in particular is going to, if you add it early on, or even in secondary, a lot of times it'll chew through most of those sugars. And a fruit ferment tastes like, it's not going to taste like what you think of as the fruit itself. You get basically the fruit minus the sugar, so you'll get some aroma, maybe some bitterness from it, but you're not going to get that, like in the case of strawberry, you're not going to get that strawberry. You're just going to get kind of a tartness. You'll get a kind of some of that aroma, but not a lot, and color. And that's why I like to add towards, during kegging. I want the juice of whatever to kind of, be completely intact. With doing it at kegging in a modern sense, you're not going to have that fruit ferment because it's cold. With thanks to modern convenience, we can do that. But all these things need to be decided before you even hit the grains hit the water. You need to have a clear plan for what you want to achieve. As far as how you do that's
So Larry, let's walk through what would it be like if, we'll say for instance, I want a beer that tastes like blueberry waffles. What would you do to make a blueberry waffle beer?
Well, the first thing I would do was I would take, you take the waffles. Okay, so I want a backbone of something that's going to be waffle like. We'll go through and for point of reference, we would need to decide whether we want like blueberry waffles with maple syrup, or whether we want like a blueberry syrup on waffles.
I want waffles with syrup and vanilla.
So, and I'm gonna do this in two parts based on which one we want to go to. Now, if you wanted to do blueberry waffles and then have like a syrup component, like you would do if you cooked the waffles with blueberries in them, you'd build a recipe based on a waffle. You would want some kind of breading. I would probably look for something a little sweeter and a little more full-bodied, maybe, but not too full-bodied, because you're not wanting an alcohol bomb with something like this, or that would be my first thought on it. I would choose a bready base malt. At the shop, Carolina Gold would be a first choice. Maris Otter would be a first choice. English Pearl would be a first choice. Belgian Pale wouldn't be a bad choice. And then I would add maybe a little Crystal, 20 or 20 or yeah, probably like a 20, just for a little bit of color. And we would add some things to it to bring out that breadiness, like a Victory malt or biscuit. Those would be the first two. Maybe a little aromatic. to get that. And I would probably take more of an English base, or a more neutral base. I wouldn't do something hop forward for this because I want that waffleness to come through. Maybe a little vanilla in the process, maybe not. But definitely something bready like Victory aromatic. I would mash kind of warm because I would want that to kind of hang around. Yeast strains, actually let's go back to hops before we get to yeast strain. I would use mainly probably English or something totally neutral like a nugget and just bitter this. Actually, I'd probably just bitter this and forget like a finishing. I would shoot for something, call it under 20 IBUs. So just enough to get it balanced. And that would be the waffle part. I would think about some vanilla. I could choose a yeast strain that may have some oaky esters, and that would give some of that sweet vanilla-like character. But I may actually add a little bit to the product.
Maple syrup would be a good addition on that too.
I ain't got there yet.
Syrup kind of feel, but yeah, go ahead.
I ain't got there yet because in part A we're going to do blueberry waffles with maple syrup. So I would be tempted after fermentation to add a little bit of blueberry, like a couple ounces of juice, like 2 to 4, just enough to give you a hint of that berry. You could also use a yeast strain, throw some stone fruit that'll help with that, like a Windsor or an SO4. And since SO4 throws a little bit of oak ester, that might be a good choice. Do I need that for that?
You might.
So that might be that'd be a good first choice. Another good choice would be English Ale 02. Even though that's not going to have the esters, it just leaves a great mouthfeel for something like this. But a ghost of it towards the end of fermentation, since we're going to do this as a flavored waffle. Upon kegging, packaging, whatever, you could, like if you're going to bottle, you could always prime with maple syrup, and that'll leave a little bit behind. But I would probably add a couple of ounces to taste to the keg to give it kind of that, to give it that round maple syrup flavor. Now, if I wanted to go more of a waffles with a blueberry syrup kind of thing, I might instead of adding the blueberry in fermentation, I'm going to hold that off to the end. Same kind of start. We're going to do kind of a bready base. Probably at this point, I would contemplate throwing maybe a tablespoon of vanilla in at the final, or in at the end of fermentation. Okay. Same kind of malt bill, but what I'm going to do is I would even think about maybe throwing in a touch of lactose at this stage in the game, because I'm wanting to leave a little residual sweetness. And a lot of times, if you're thinking with blueberry waffles, with a blueberry or waffles with blueberry syrup, there's even going to be whipped cream on the top. I'm going to kind of have that. I'm going to think about that, and I'm going to add blueberry juice to the keg because I want that big boom blueberry, whether it's a syrup or a flavoring. That's where I'm going to add that. But once again, I'm not adding that juice to the keg. It's not going to ferment out. You're going to get the sweetness from it. It's not going to go away. You ferment blueberries, you get an acidity. You're going to get a texture from them. It's a nice silky texture, but the sugar's going to go away. You're going to be left with what blueberries would taste like without sugar. It's kind of tart. It's kind of tannic. I'm not going to want that. I'm going to want it before the sugar goes away. And that would get me basically to where I would be going. How much juice? Call it 6 or 8 ounces. But I'd start with probably 4, taste it, and then add more. I'm a big fan, especially, and that's the joy of adding things at the end of the process. You can add and you can taste and decide if it needs more, because you can always put more in, but you can't take it out. You could also use flavorings, but I tend to go with the juice or the fruit and add it and keep it cold, so it doesn't ferment out.
Does anybody else here want waffles right now?
I never not want waffles.
We should all, now that you put that down there, we should all brew a blueberry waffle beer and have it, bring it to one of the meetings when we finally are able to meet and have everybody taste each one's version.
Yeah. I just saw your name, Honey Bucket. I like that.
A waffle beer would be good, but see, like if we say blueberry waffles and limit it to that, then we can't do things like maple bourbon pecan.
I think this is a good point. Does anybody have questions about what he's gone through so far? Now's a good time to speak up. Let's just talk about what Larry's gone through so far and how he's developed this recipe. Has anybody got a question about that right now? Don't be shy. So I'll go if nobody else will. So Larry, you read off a few different base grains. What drives your choice of base grains? Because I thought I heard you say Golden Promise, or did I mishear?
No, but that wouldn't have been a bad choice.
Because this seems like a perfect opportunity for Golden Promise, which has got that really sweet backbone, and
that would be a good one. And at that point, I wouldn't probably throw any crystal in. I would probably look to maybe throw a little more things like, or a little higher percentage of something like Victory, Special Roast, something to add more of a nuttiness. That would be a good
nuttiness,
solid base malt for that. As far as base malt choices, I'm ultimately I'm looking for several things. One, when I'm examining the recipe, I'm trying to decide, is this a big component of it? I mean, it's always going to be a component of it in a very real sense, but is the malt the driving component? And if so, which characteristics? If I'm trying to do something bready or nutty, I'm going to choose a malt that's going to have more of those characteristics in mind. Even Vienna, you could even try some Vienna and some of the stuff, or Munich and something a little heavier. That would work as a percentage. Maybe split that with something a little more neutral, like a Pilsner or a standard American two-row.
Can you talk some about like breadiness percentages with different types of bread grain, like Victory? Like
Victory,
you're looking crispy, burnt taste from a waffle where it's just a little burnt around the edges. My mouth is watering. Like
at that point, I would be looking. Let's call it. I probably wouldn't use any more than 5% Victory. Huh. But if I was doing like most of y'all are gonna be doing 5-gallon batches, I would probably use minimum 4, but probably 8 ounces to as much as a pound, depending on how bready I want it. But let's say I didn't want the breadiness to be a big component, then I would choose a more neutral. U.S. malts tend to be more neutral, tend to be a little less sweet than your EU and UK. Obviously, the local malt house is the exception to the rule, but in general speaking, you're going to get a little less character out of them. Your Belgians are going to be a little more bready, a little more nutty, but not as round as an English. And your German ingredients base malts are going to be a little sweeter. As a general not necessarily specific. But that comes back to what am I trying to achieve? And you have to keep that in view. Because if you start going into too many different directions, you're going to wind up with a beer, like I said, it's muddy. And if there's too many flavors, you can't pick them out. And it's not as enjoyable.
Sure.
Go down a rabbit hole again.
Does anybody else have a question? Now's the time. Unmute yourself and ask away. Anybody?
Yeah, I had one. Have you guys ever, and especially Larry, this one, have you found that with some of the more biscuity type malts, well, like you just said, Maris Otter and Golden Promise, Victory, Biscuit Malt, any of those, have you ever found that you have to add more clarification in to get a clearer product at the end after fermentation? Because sometimes I find that they tend to be more hazy if you don't add, or maybe it's just me, or maybe that has to do with mash temperature or preparation, or maybe
it could be that. As far as clarity speaking, assuming we're not talking about a yeast, a yeast haze hanging around, you're usually dealing with protein hazes. Your breadier malts do tend to have a little more proteins to them. But that could be as much process. Are you getting good hot break? Are you getting good cold break? Are you using things like weir flock to get it to settle out?
No, I'm talking about apart from Werflock tablets or anything like that. And let's just say even using something, a high attenuating yeast, like let's say a high flocculating yeast like Nottingham or something,
right, it's going to flock out pretty clear. Or
yeah. Even with that, I find that sometimes it depends. I can get some sort of a cloudiness inside there that I may not have anticipated. And I didn't know.
Are you dealing with specifically IPAs when you're talking about that?
No. I'm talking about whether it be Scottish ales, Belgians, any one of them. I find any one of them. It could be any one of those.
Less with non-hoppy stuff or things that don't have like a wheat in.
Yeah, you just said the wheat. I'm kind of suspecting that in those cases that have come out. I would probably think that going toward carapils. You just said that now, and I didn't think about the wheat profile.
But yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with higher protein malts, they tend to cloud the product a little more than lower protein malts. I mean, you can break those proteins can be broken, like I said, hot break, cold break. Clarity firm will help with stuff like that. Time can help. Are you dealing mainly with chill haze, or are you dealing with just a general haze?
Just a general haze, I've noticed. Sometimes I've seen it's hit and miss, but I noticed that it sometimes tends to happen more with like breadier malts. I don't have that problem if I were to just use like something that had 2-row Crystal 20 and maybe a Victory or Munich in it, something simple like that. I very rarely would have any problems with that. But every time I get into the Maris Otter or Golden Promise or any of that biscuit malt, Victory, and then I add a little bit of wheat malt to that, it doesn't make a difference, if I throw in Werflock tablets or whatever, which is normal process. I kind of see that it's a hit or miss, so it's like, 30% of the time I may get like a little bit more haze, and I didn't know if that was due maybe to the boil, whether I should have done a protein rest more,
protein
like
rest help with that.
Yeah, probably 3, because sometimes I skip the protein rest and I'm thinking, maybe I should have left it at 120 for 10 minutes. You know what I mean? So
protein helps. Rest will help with the clarity. But honestly, I would be looking at actual grain bill. If you've got 10% wheat, it's not gonna want to clear like if there was no wheat in it. Once again, higher protein malts just tend to leave a little bit of haze behind, more than lower, because there's proteins in it. It's harder to get it out, or more proteins.
Leads me to the next question: is would you what other malts give you or aid in having head retention? For instance, we all know wheat and then carapils, right? Is there any other malts that how's that?
Crystals help with head retention. And
all of them, or just anyone? Because I didn't know that.
Anything, any crystals and cara malts tend to help with head, but that it comes back to residual sugars. Beers that have more residual sugar in general are going to have more head. So if you've got a higher final gravity, you're going to have more head, because there's something to hold on to that CO2. And outside of things like wheat, hop oils help with that too. And that.
I believe Dave's got a question. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay. Hey, Larry.
Yo.
Thanks for doing this today. I always enjoy when I share a recipe with you and I ask you questions. I always like to see that process that you go through, that you just went through tonight, about keeping in mind the end result of the beer and the way you kind of work backwards and then go back forwards again. It's really kind of cool. But my question has to do with, whenever I have a beer and it's not got that malt backbone, I call it, no matter what the style is, it's a disappointing beer. And I've had those beers at many microbrewery places. Not all, but there are a lot of commercial or microbrews that just are missing that backbone.
The magic of mouthfeel.
Yeah. So how can we avoid doing that?
So that's a couple part answer. The first thing that I'm gonna break into with that is, you have too much or more alcohol, or the higher amount of alcohol for the style, the beer itself is going to be a little drier. You're going to have a lower final gravity. You're not going to have that silk. You're not going to have that mouthfeel. We Americans tend to push to the extremes one way or another with style. So in that whole, if you've got a pale ale that's 7% and started its life at 60, it's not got anything to keep that mouthfeel. Other ways you get, that's funny. Other ways you don't have good mouthfeel. Low temperatures. One, that's going to create more fermentable sugars. You're going to get more alcohol, but you're not going to have that residual sweetness. You're not going to have that residual on the. The thing with beer production in general, it's not like a sliding scale. If you want alcohol, you are eating up sugars, and it's thinning the product. You don't. If you want mouthfeel, I mean, if you're looking for that round, and I think that is something that a lot of American beers we've left behind, is that magic of mouthfeel. So mash temperature, that's one thing you look at. Personally, if I'm making a beer for myself, I tend to not go much below 154, 156, because I love that mouthfeel. I want to feel that beer going down my throat, because I'm very thirsty. So that's one aspect. Another one is I mentioned bitterness to gravity. If you push the IBU of a beer up, it makes it drink less sweet So a more bitter beer is not going to have, it's not going to have that satisfying feel in your mouth as much as if it was a little bit, well, sweeter. Proteins like wheat, that helps with the mouthfeel. Highly attenuative yeast tend to chew through sugars. Like, well, the Chico strain, you can get 85% attenuation with that. And that's going to make a much more dry beer than if you, say, chose anything else. I'm going to want to leave some stuff on the back of a beer. And this is especially true with lagers. One of the biggest things I've noticed with light lagers is people not leaving stuff on the back of them. Whereas if you go and you get even some of the American beers, there is a little residual sweetness. Whereas if you got a lager that finishes, the finals 06, there's not going to be that. It's just going to be kind of metallic. But the trick is you have to leave the residual sweetness in the balance of the beer.
Mm-hmm.
I know I keep repeating myself in that, but that's the fact of the matter is if you're looking for that texture, you've got to leave it behind.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Larry, going back to the waffle beer, you mentioned keeping the IBUs down to around 20.
Yeah, or lower.
Or lower, yes. Basically, you're trying to balance the overall malt sweetness. You don't want too much sweetness, so you want to add a little bit of bitterness, but you don't want too much bitterness.
You don't want it to drink like syrup.
Right. You don't want it to drink like syrup, and you don't want it to have where's that bitter taste coming from? Because I don't get bitter when I'm eating waffles. So I think around 13 to 20 is probably great. What are my thinking is some of the English hops would probably work better.
I would probably go with it. I would probably go something English would work. Something neutral, like if you wanted to use Nugget, that would work. Because you're not going to use a whole lot of it. And like I said, I probably wouldn't even bother with a finishing hop. Anything, the last half of the beer, because the hop character is something I'm not interested in. I want that malt to come forward. I'm going to want, the berry I'm going to add to the beer or syrup to be one of the main focuses.
Hey, Larry.
Yes.
I've heard you say it a couple times. You were talking about malts that were high protein versus malts that were low protein.
Yes.
Could you talk about that just a little bit and kind of go into what do you mean by high protein malts and low protein malts, please?
Wheat would be a high protein malt.
Okay.
But it's going to create a little silkiness. It can create haze. US two-row would not be an example of a high protein malt. Wheats in particular are a good source if you're looking for that if you're looking for protein. Rye would have it. That's why you a lot of times will see in like a rye pale ale or something they're going to do a protein rest. Did that narrow it down?
Yes. I know that there's different levels, but I didn't really know what a high protein malt was.
Or higher. It's not
Higher, yeah.
And ish are important terms in brewing, I guess.
Now those proteins are unfermentable, aren't they? Mostly.
These would be the proteins that would be responsible, well, one for head retention, but like chill haze. Things that tend to cause chill haze have more protein. Lower modified malts have more. You'll have more haze with like floor malted Marisot or floor malted Pilsner, as an example. Modified malts have more proteins. Oats have a lot of protein in them.
Oh.
which once again, they'll help to cloud a product.
Does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the next part? Don't be shy. Speak up. Now's a good time.
I was just wondering, this is kind of a crazy question, but what's the minimum amount of hops, IBUs, that you think you could get by with in a beer?
Well, if you were doing a 3% bitters, you could probably get by with, or let's say you were going to do a 2 or 3% beer, you could probably get by 8 to 10 IBUs, and have a balanced beer. But it comes back to that ratio of gravity to bitterness. The perfect example is a 30 IBU pale ale is par for the course. That's what we expect. It's balanced. But a 30 IBU light lager it's bitter as it's a very bitter beer. It's a kick to the face. You're dealing with less malt to balance that. And off the reservation, I haven't really talked about adjuncts in most cases, with the exception of let's pull wheat out, or unmalted wheat. Let's pull that out. But like your sugars, your flaked corns, your flaked rice, these actually result in less head retention. They're going to ferment out a lot. You're going to get less body with these. It's going to actually lighten the beer, and that kind of pulls back, or that can also serve to, one, remove a little bit of texture, and two, you're going to get less head with the high uses of these, even though they can help to beef up the ABV of a beer without adding heaviness to it.
So does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next part?
I was going to interject on one thing real quick.
Go ahead, Mike.
Adding the question on how many hops or IBUs. Remember, gruits don't have any hops in it, and usually use elderberry and stuff like that. So you could get way down in the IBU range, but use just a bit of the bittering from herbs and stuff like they do in
yeah, you can use bitter herbs you're adding the bitterness without IBUs, because that's a function for hops. You could add like fruit, like citrus, to help balance. Back in the day, for hops really weren't used in beer in Europe till Europe started showing up about 1200. England, there was a fight up to the 1600s about the use of hops, but the Dutch immigrants kind of brought them with them, and surprise, surprise, people like hops. But you can use other things to offset the sweetness of the malt. Roasted grains do that. Bitter roasted grains like roast barley, that can help to offset the sweetness of malt.
Richard, I believe you had a question.
Hey, Larry, getting back to higher ABV beers and backbone and, mouthfeel. I know High Branch does a really good job with their higher ABV
They do.
A's, and I was wondering what their trick is to get that, because they've got some good backbone in most of theirs, and also some great mouthfeel, drinkability, and you don't even realize, if it's a 9.5% double IPA that you're drinking.
I mean, and that is what you really want to achieve on a higher ABV. The ABV beer is you want something that drinks like it's lower ABV, that is more balanced than what it is. You can do that with a couple. If you want to add that mouthfeel back to a beer, you can use things like lactose. That's absolutely. But the main way you do that on a higher ABV beer is you have a bigger final gravity, within a certain within reason. I mean, if the final gravity is 1040, it's going to be hard to balance that unless you're going to add enough bittering hops or bitter things to bitter the beer to offset it, but it's still going to drink heavy. Ultimately, though, I would say that the trick to making a higher ABV beer that's balanced will be residual sweetness on the back end, within reason. Everything within reason, because once again, it is kind of a sliding scale.
That makes sense. Thanks.
And that's oat pollen, not COVID. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. You're going to want to leave enough residual backbone to balance the alcohol. If I wanted to make a 9% beer, I would be shooting for my final gravity to be in the 1020s. That is an important reason to step out. But yeah, I would want to leave, something in the realm of that. Whereas, like, if you've got a beer that finishes that's 9% and it finished 10-12, you're going to taste that alcohol. You've got to have something to cover it. And once again, malt's usually the way to go for that. Even with a hoppier beer, you're going to want to leave a little bit of that on the back end. And that was one of the things with the juicy craze. You've got beers that are not bone dry, or the really good ones anyway. They're not bone dry, so that hop presence kind of comes forward. You get more of that juice because they didn't dry it out. That's the whole purpose of adding all the oats, all the flaked barley into a juicy or a hazy. You're leaving something on the backbone to give texture, or on the back end to give texture.
Okay, any other questions before we move on to the next part? Okay, thought we'd go into talking a little bit about ingredient selection, grain selection next, Larry.
Ingredient selection in general, once again, you're going to want to use the least amount of a variety of ingredients to get what you're shooting for.
Less is more.
Less is more. The more types of grains in particular you add to a product, the bigger chance you're going to have to muddy that product. You want simple. You don't want 7 different types of crystal unless you're doing a chum bucket beer to clean out the pantry. You want, pick 1 or 2. If you're wanting to add some roast to a beer, you're not going to want to use a fistful of different roasted grains. You're going to want to pick your little roast barley, pick you chocolate, maybe both, maybe Carafa 3, just something to, but not everything. Don't pick every single thing that gives it, because everything's got a little is going to have a little subtle note to it. Too much of those, and you're going to muddy the product. It's fatiguing the palate, and it is not as enjoyable. With complexity, complex is good, but you're not going to want to stress the palate. Let's say I want to build on the other side of the coin, I want to build a complex IPA. I'll pick 3 or 4 hops to showcase. I'm not going to pick all the hops. Things get lost. If you want to add, whether it's a hop or a malt, pick 1 or 2 examples of whatever you want to, whatever element or quality that you're wanting to showcase, whatever flavor, pick 1 or 2 and only add that. Back to less is more. Did that make sense? That wasn't word salad.
one of the things I think about, Larry, because I'm on another side of this. Well, you're on the kind of on the same side when it comes to brewing and designing beers for a brewery. You're looking at larger scale. You're looking at trying to reduce the number of things you have to keep in stock. And same thing for, I think, to a certain extent, same thing for home brewing. For those of you who collect a little bit of grain here, collect a little hops there. If I, going back to the waffle beer, if I build a waffle beer, like you said, I want to accentuate those three things: bready, biscuity kind of flavors, blueberry, and something sweet or something like lactose, and basically build that beer where those 3 points are highlighted, but not so many other things that overtake. So if I'm building another beer, I want if I tell somebody it's a waffle beer, a blueberry waffle beer, they're going to drink it and say, wow, this tastes like blueberry, this tastes like waffles. Oh, I can taste the syrup, or I can taste this. And there are things that you didn't actually qualify to build into your recipe, but because they're told it's a blueberry waffle beer, they're going to be looking for other blueberry waffle experiences inside just those three things that you've showcased.
And you absolutely can suggest something and plant a flavor idea in someone's head. That absolutely is a thing. But you kind of hit the nail on the head. You don't want to have you don't want to stock 17 malts, because it's honestly it's not necessary. You come back to, you want to use as few for economical reasons. You want to use as few specialty grains or as few different varieties of base malts as you can get away with. So you have to have a clear view of what you want to make to start with. That's the one thing for recipe design that I really would like to stress, is have a clear end goal, and don't get lost in minutia. You want to get to where you want to get to. You want to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Does anybody have a question about ingredient selection and what you should be choosing? Now's a good time to chime in with that. Either raise your hand or go ahead and speak up if you got a question right now. Anybody? Because I do have one thing I want to bring up. I want to give somebody else a chance first. So a few months ago, maybe a few more than that, I was up at Brewers Depot, and I wanted to choose some base grain for my Belgian beers that I was going to be making. And in my mind, I go to best malts because that's the best grain out there. And I wanted bready. And someone, Larry, said, oh, but wait, I got another grain. And he said, try Carolina Malt House. And I'm like, there's no way an American malt's going to be as good as best malts. So I turned my back. He gave me a handful of malt in each hand, and I ate the malt straight out of the bag. And I chose the one that I liked the best and said, this is best malts. No, it was Carolina Malt House. And that breadiness, I don't know how Carolina Malt House gets it, does it, but can you kind of talk about that some? Because I'm still
I think it's got to do with maybe some of the local soil. That's the only thing I've got as far as that, and some of the skill of the maltsters. I mentioned earlier, usually American grains are a little more neutral. That is, their malt is an exception, and I'm not just trying to plug them. Prior to their existence, I really was an EU and UK malt snob.
Same here.
Own anything. I didn't own anything that happened to be U.S. It was not my thing. Breese's base malt, there's nothing wrong with it. I never, or even raw, it did not have enough character to me. And I really have been impressed with what Henry's done. I think it may have to do. It may have to do with the local soil. That's.
Oh wait, before we move on, you said it may have to do with the maltster's skill or process
As well.
Can you talk about that some? I mean, I don't know what maltsters do. To me, it's all magic. But I mean, is there a way that you can control that stuff?
Well, I mean, it has to do with kilning temperatures, but
it has to do with germination, the water temperature of the germination, and then once that goes in the kill, there's a process of how long it's at what temperature for once it's germinated and then dried and then killed and roasted and certain time and temperature. It's a whole lot of factors that go into to malting. And if you've never done, so in my class that I teach through RCCC, which we're full this semester, so.
Hashtag plug. Does anybody else have a question? Does anybody else have a question? Now's the time. We're coming up on the hour. We can go into a little more topic about terms, but I really want to get people's questions in. So if you got a question, now's the time. Hit us, because I know you guys got questions. Anybody? Don't prove me wrong. Okay. We had talked about discussing terms a little bit.
okay.
You want to go there? Beer characteristics.
It seems like we were talking about malt characteristics. You're referring to?
Yes.
I'll do this in a couple of different segments. Base malts can be just sweet. German Pilsner is a good example of a just sweet malt. Another good Golden Promise is very sweet. There's a ghost of breadiness, but it's a pretty sweet, but it's a different kind of sweetness where that's more like a syrup, more of a, whereas like German Pilsner, it tends to be more grape, by lack of a better word. You can get a breadiness or from a good base malt, like your Belgian malts tend to be a little bit bready.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina Malt House's Pilsner's bready. You can have kind of a balance of the two, like an English Pearl. Munich's going to be, it would be a base malt, but it would be more nutty, round, heavy biscuit. Vienna's more nutty. Carolina Gold, you're going to deal with something that's a little more, it's a blend of sweetness and nutty, similar to some of your Maris Otter blends that have like Maris Otter and Pearl in them. English lager malt is going to be more neutral, like most of your just like standard American two rows. Really, when I'm talking base malts, let's pull out Munich and Vienna. I'm looking. I think of it as two distinct varieties. You've got your lager malts, and then you've got your pale ale malts. Your pale ale malts are going to have more of that full body. You're going to have that more of that full body nuttiness that if you were to do a smash beer that you would get. Whereas your lager-esque malts are going to be are not going to have that. They're going to be more neutral. Maybe a little sweetness, but they're still going to be more neutral. Specialty grains, you're gonna get things that accentuates that kind of toastiness. Those are going to be more your kiln malts. It'll start with something like a biscuit or a Victory, and it'll go all the way to a brown malt or past that. Even I would consider with toasted roasted grains like roast barley or black patent. It's going to have that burnt kind of character. That's one thing, and then you've got the things where they use they wet kiln it like crystals that you're going to have that sweetness. That's going to basically add cooked sugar flavors like caramel malts, your caramunics. I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but when I start thinking about malts, I take that into consideration, and I'll usually when I'm designing a recipe, if I want a Belgian recipe, I'm going to look to Belgian specialties definitely. If I want if I want, say I want to do some kind of lager like a Doppelbock or something like that, I'll look to the German specialties. Outside of that, U.S. or whatever, just kind of to build from. Was that where you wanted me to go with that, or?
Yeah, I think it was. Okay, we're kind of coming up on the hour. Does anybody else have any questions? Right now is your perfect time to ask Larry questions. Anybody question?
Comments and side remarks.
Yeah. Now's a great time to speak up. Anybody got a question about anything recipe related? If not, we'll let Larry go, but now's a great time to ask. All right. Well, Larry, I appreciate you coming by and hanging out with us and talking about this stuff. I remember I came by your shop about 8 years ago, and I had this beautiful design for a beer recipe that included 12 different malts. And you were saying, you don't need all these malts. And I said,
No.
This one does a job. This malt does a job. This malt does a job. And it was the worst beer I ever made. So, yeah, I learned.
And that illustrated what I was talking about as far as muddy. Everything has a specific reason to put it in a beer. Don't pick everything that has the same reason for going in the beer. Pick one or two, preferably one, because you want as few ingredients. The fewer ingredients you add, the cleaner the product's going to be. And that really translates into drinkability.
That's absolutely true. Okay, last call for questions. Anybody speak up, unmute yourself, and ask a question. Other than that, we'll let everybody go.
Hey, Larry. This is Dave here. I just made a coconut brown, and
Okay.
I added the coconut, in a canister to the keg after everything was fermented.
Mm-hmm.
And the coconut flavor is unbelievable. I mean, I love it. But in the keg, something happened. When I left for a week, I came back, and all this brown stuff was up around the lid of my keg. So did that go through a secondary fermentation, or what happened there?
Was it cold?
No, it was room temperature. Well, basement temperature.
That's what it was. It's something started fermenting or came to life.
Okay.
The trick to add stuff like that 2 second to keg, get the keg cold. At that point, the sugars won't ferment. Most are not going to be able to ferment in 40 less than 40 degrees. Yeah, they're some.
Okay.
In fact, that also helps with spoilage bacteria. With it, you get less of it.
All right, so I've got less of a malt character than I wanted. That might have something to do with it, you think?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks.
And that's why it was so much better before you left.
Yeah, it was. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Rabbit holes you want me to run down? I'm good at running down rabbit holes. But that is one of the things I think I probably should reiterate again. Let's say you are going to add something that's fermentable to the final product. If you want that to stay in the product and not ferment out, you have to get it cold. Yes, there are chemical stabilizers you can use. I wouldn't use it in beer. I would use temperature. That'll work better. I see your hand up, Brad, but you're muted.
Okay, last question. Who wants to ask the last question of the night? Anybody? This is it. Last question. Other than that, we're going to let Larry go. Don't be shy. Okay, that's it. Larry, thank you very much. Thomas, thank you very much. Brewers Depot, thank you for coming by and
Pleasure.
Well, thank you for
all
having
this
me.
great talk. And we'll have to do it again. So thanks. You guys can all drop off, or if everybody wants to just hang out and chat for a little bit, we can do that as well. Thank you, Larry.
Good to see you, man.
Take it easy.
We'll drop off.